Part 1. The Rise and Fall of Pablo Escobar. Part 1. The Making of a Kingpin. Humble Beginnings. The story of Pablo Escobar is one of ambition, power, and violence on an unprecedented scale. To understand the man he became, we must first look at the boy he was. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born on December 1, 1949, in the small town of Rio Negro, Colombia. He was the third of 7 children in a family that would soon move to the city of Medellin. His father was a farmer, and his mother was a schoolteacher. The family was not destitute, but they were far from wealthy, living a humble life in a working-class neighborhood. From a very young age, Escobar demonstrated a fierce ambition and an entrepreneurial spirit, albeit a criminal one. Even as a teenager, he was involved in various illicit schemes. He sold fake diplomas and forged report cards. He smuggled stereo equipment into the country. In one of his most notorious early ventures, he stole tombstones, sandblasted off the inscriptions, and resold them to smugglers. This demonstrated a chilling lack of empathy that would later define his career. He also stole cars, an offense that led to his first arrest in 1974. Escobar's early academic life showed brief promise, but was ultimately cut short. He left high school shortly before his 17th birthday, but returned 2 years later. Teachers and classmates from this time described him as disruptive and prone to intimidating his peers. He eventually dropped out for good, but not before forging a high school diploma. With this fake credential, he briefly attended the Universidad Autónoma Latinoamericana in Medellin. He harbored dreams of becoming a criminal lawyer, a politician, or even the president of Colombia. However, financial constraints forced him to abandon his studies, closing the door to a legitimate path to power. The streets of Medellin in the 1960s and 70s were a tough training ground. It was here that Escobar truly learned the rules of power. He moved beyond petty crime into more violent offenses, including kidnappings for ransom. One of the most prominent victims was a wealthy Medellin businessman named Diego Echeverria. Echeverria was kidnapped in 1971, and despite his family paying a ransom of $50,000, he was killed. Escobar was widely believed to be involved, marking a serious escalation in his criminal profile. During this period, Colombia was emerging as a key location for the smuggling of marijuana. Escobar began working as a small-time dealer and enforcer for various drug smugglers. He quickly recognized that the real future and immense profits lay not in marijuana, but in a different substance: cocaine. Colombia's strategic position, nestled between coca cultivation centers in Peru and Bolivia and the insatiably lucrative market in North America, made it the perfect hub. This realization was the turning point. The ambitious young criminal from Medellin saw his path to ultimate power. He began to transition fully into the cocaine trade, a decision that would change his life and the history of Colombia forever. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic and bloody rises in criminal history. This concludes Part 1 of our series on Pablo Escobar. In Part 2, we will explore the formation of the Medellín Cartel and its rapid, terrifying ascent to global dominance.
Part 2. The Cocaine Boom and the Birth of the Medellín Cartel. The 1970s marked a pivotal shift in the global drug trade, and Pablo Escobar was perfectly positioned to capitalize on it. While he had been involved in various criminal activities, his true fortune began with the cocaine explosion. The demand for cocaine in the United States was growing at an astonishing rate. What was once a drug for the elite was becoming increasingly popular in mainstream clubs and parties. Escobar, with his sharp business mind, saw this not as a trend, but as a revolution. His initial foray into the cocaine business was modest. He began by acting as a middleman, facilitating the transport of small quantities of the drug. He would buy cocaine paste from processors in Peru and Bolivia. This paste was then refined in hidden laboratories in the jungles of Colombia. The finished product was smuggled into the United States, primarily through Florida. The profits from even these early small-scale operations were immense. They dwarfed the income from all his previous criminal ventures combined. Escobar quickly realized that to maximize profits, he needed to control the entire chain. He needed to move from being a middleman to being the source. This ambition led to the formation of what would become the most powerful criminal organization in history, the Medellín Cartel. The cartel was not a formal corporation with a board of directors. It was a loose confederation of powerful drug traffickers who pooled their resources. They collaborated on logistics, security, and distribution to increase efficiency and profits. Escobar was its undisputed leader, the driving force and strategic mastermind. But he did not operate alone. He surrounded himself with formidable partners. Carlos later was a key figure, an innovator in transportation. He revolutionized the smuggling process by purchasing a large island in the Bahamas, Norman's Cay. He used this as a transshipment point, creating a reliable aerial bridge between Colombia and the United States. Jorge Luis Ochoa and his brothers, along with José Gonzalo Rodríguez Gacha, were other founding members. They brought their own networks, expertise, and ruthless efficiency to the organization. Together, they established a vertically integrated monopoly. They controlled the purchase of the raw coca paste. They oversaw the refinement process in their own labs. They managed the sophisticated transportation networks using boats, planes, and even submarines. They established distribution cells in major American cities. This end-to-end control allowed them to flood the United States with cocaine. At its peak, the Medellín Cartel was estimated to be smuggling into the U.S. 70 to 80 tons of cocaine every month. The financial rewards were almost beyond comprehension. Escobar's personal income was estimated to be over $20 billion per year. He famously claimed that he lost $2.5 billion every year simply from rats eating cash stored in his warehouses. To launder this staggering amount of money, he embarked on a massive spending spree. He bought hundreds of properties, including luxury apartments, farms, and discotheques. He purchased an entire neighborhood in Medellin, which he named Medellin without slums, building homes for the poor. He acquired cars, planes, and a private zoo with hippos, elephants, and other exotic animals. This spending was not just for personal pleasure, it was a strategic tool. His philanthropy, in particular, was a calculated effort to win the hearts of the poor. He built soccer fields, funded community centers, and handed out cash to people in the streets. To many in the impoverished neighborhoods of Medellin, he was Robin Hood, a man who took from the rich and gave to the poor. This popular support became a powerful shield, making it difficult for the government to move against him. However, beneath this veneer of generosity lay a foundation of absolute brutality. The cartel's business was built on violence and intimidation. Anyone who threatened their operation, informants, rivals, or law enforcement, was eliminated. The term plata o plomo became their infamous motto: accept a bribe, silver, or face a bullet, lead. This choice was offered to police officers, judges, politicians, and journalists. Many accepted the money, corrupting the very institutions meant to uphold the law. Those who refused were systematically hunted down and murdered. The body count began to rise, marking the streets of Colombia with blood. The birth of the Medellín Cartel was not just the creation of a drug syndicate. It was the creation of a parallel state, with its own economy, its own army, and its own ruler, Pablo Escobar. He had achieved immense wealth and power, but his ambition was still not satisfied. He now set his sights on a goal that would bring him into direct, open conflict with the Colombian government: political legitimacy. Part 3. The Political Dream and the Descent into War. Pablo Escobar's immense wealth granted him power, but it was not the kind of power he ultimately craved. He desired legitimacy, respect, and a place in the history books of Colombia as a statesman, not a criminal. This driving ambition led him to pursue a political career, a move that would trigger his first major conflict with the state. In 1982, Escobar achieved his first formal step into politics. He was elected as an alternate representative to the Colombian Congress. The position was largely ceremonial, but for Escobar, it was a symbol of his acceptance into the establishment. He used his new title, Honorable Representative, with immense pride. His political platform was built on the populist image he had carefully cultivated. He championed the cause of the poor and the marginalized. He spoke out against the political oligarchy that had long controlled Colombia. To his supporters, he was a man of the people, a successful businessman who hadn't forgotten his roots. This political foray was part of a broader movement he helped found called the New Liberalism. The movement aimed to reform the traditional Liberal Party, pushing for social justice and anti-corruption measures. For a brief moment, it seemed Pablo Escobar was on a path to transforming his image. He dreamed of one day becoming the president of Colombia. He believed he could use his wealth and influence to reshape the nation. However, his past was a shadow that would not relent. Two figures in particular were determined to expose his true nature. The first was Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonilla. The second was the influential journalist Guillermo Cano, editor of the newspaper El Espectador. Cano's paper began publishing a series of investigative reports. They meticulously documented Escobar's criminal history, from his early arrests for car theft to his burgeoning drug empire. The articles were a direct assault on Escobar's carefully constructed facade. Simultaneously, Minister Lara Bonilla took up the fight from within the government. He used his position to publicly denounce Escobar and other narcotics traffickers who were infiltrating politics. In a dramatic session in Congress, he presented evidence of Escobar's criminal background. He revealed the stolen car arrest and the fake diploma, shattering the honorable representative image. The political establishment, initially willing to tolerate him, quickly turned its back on him. The scandal forced Escobar to resign his congressional position in disgrace just months after obtaining it. His political career was over before it had truly begun. The dream of legitimate power was shattered. For Escobar, this was not a simple defeat, it was a profound humiliation. He had been publicly unmasked and rejected by the very system he sought to join. His response was not of retreat, but of devastating retaliation. He would demonstrate that if he could not be part of the state, he would become a state unto himself, one built on terror. The first to fall was Guillermo Cano. On December 17, 1986, as Cano left his newspaper's offices, assassins on a motorcycle gunned him down. The murder was a clear message to the press: silence or die. The next and most significant target was Rodrigo Lara Bonilla. On April 30, 1984, Lara Bonilla was being driven home in his armored car. Assassins on motorcycles using high-powered weapons boxed in the vehicle and fired dozens of rounds, killing the justice minister. The assassination was a brazen declaration of war against the Colombian state. It marked a point of no return. Escobar and the Medellín Cartel were no longer just criminal entrepreneurs, they were insurgents. The Colombian government, under President Belisario Betancourt, responded with force. It signed an extradition treaty with the United States. This meant that Colombian drug traffickers could be sent to face justice in American courts, where they could not bribe or intimidate their way to freedom. For Escobar, extradition was the ultimate threat, his neuralgia. He famously stated, "I prefer a grave in Colombia to a jail cell in the United States." This fear would dictate his actions for the rest of his life. The lines were now drawn. The cartel was at war with the government, the judiciary, and the free press. The period known as the Colombian Drug War had begun. It was a conflict that would drown the nation in blood, pitting the resources of the state against the bottomless wealth and ruthlessness of a single man. Escobar had chosen the path of all-out war, a decision that would ultimately lead to his destruction.
Part 4. The Surrender. The Illusion of Justice. By 1991, Pablo Escobar's war against the Colombian state and his rivals had reached a devastating stalemate. The constant pressure from the search block, the emergence of the vigilante group Los Pepes, and the attrition within his own organization had taken a heavy toll. Escobar was a fugitive, but he was not defeated. He was looking for a way out that would preserve his life and legacy. His greatest fear, the one that dictated his every move, was extradition to the United States. He famously stated, "I prefer a grave in Colombia to a jail cell in the United States." This fear became the basis for a shocking negotiation with the Colombian government. Through intermediaries, including his own family and the priest Rafael Garcia Herreros, Escobar brokered a deal with President Cesar Gaviria's administration. The terms were unprecedented. Escobar would surrender and confess to some crimes in exchange for a guarantee that he would not be extradited. He would also be allowed to serve his sentence in a prison of his own design and construction. The government, desperate to end the bloodshed and capture the world's most wanted drug lord, agreed. In June 1991, Pablo Escobar surrendered to authorities. He was taken to his new prison, a compound he had built on a hillside overlooking his hometown of Medellin. It was called La Catedral, the cathedral. From the outside, it appeared to be a secure facility, but inside it was anything but a prison. La Catedral was a luxury enclave equipped with a giant dollhouse, a bar, a jacuzzi, a soccer field, and breathtaking views. Escobar lived there with his associates, enjoying a steady supply of fine food, alcohol, and prostitutes. He was able to host lavish parties and was even rumored to leave the premises occasionally to attend football matches. Most importantly, he never stopped running his criminal empire. From within the walls of La Catedral, he maintained telephone contact with his network, overseeing his remaining business interests and directing his ongoing conflicts. For Escobar, this was not a punishment. It was a strategic retreat, a fortified palace where he could wait out the storm in comfort and safety. For the Colombian government, it was a public relations nightmare and a blatant mockery of justice. The situation at La Catedral could not last. The illusion of Escobar's imprisonment was shattered in late 1992. Two of his cartel associates, Fernando Galeano and Juan Moncada, were suspected of withholding money from him. In a brutal display of his unchallenged power, Escobar had the two men brought to La Catedral. Inside the prison walls, they were tortured and murdered on his orders. This act was too brazen for the government to ignore. It confirmed to the public and to the authorities that Escobar was not a repentant prisoner, but a crime lord operating from a state-sanctioned sanctuary. The government decided to act. They announced plans to transfer Escobar from his luxurious compound to a standard, high-security prison. For Escobar, this was a breach of their agreement, and more terrifyingly, a potential first step toward extradition. On July 22, 1992, as officials moved to relocate him, Pablo Escobar executed his escape plan. After holding the visiting justice minister hostage to ensure his safe passage, he and his men simply walked out of La Catedral and disappeared into the mountains surrounding Medellin. He was a fugitive once more, but the world had changed. His empire was weakened, his allies were fewer, and his enemies were more determined than ever before. The manhunt that followed was larger and more intense than before. The United States became more deeply involved, with Delta Force operatives and intelligence agencies joining the Colombian search block led by Colonel Hugo Martinez. Simultaneously, the vigilante group Los Pepes, backed by his rivals in the Cali Cartel, waged a ruthless campaign of their own. They bombed Escobar's properties, assassinated his lawyers and financial managers, and targeted his family, seeking to destroy his entire support structure. Escobar was now being squeezed from two sides, by the official state manhunt and by a private, merciless army. His world was shrinking rapidly. The escape from La Catedral, which he had seen as an act of defiance, marked the beginning of his final, desperate chapter. The kingpin who had once lived in a palace was now constantly on the move, hiding in safe houses, his power and influence fading with each passing day.
Part 5. The Final Hunt. The Last Days of Pablo Escobar. The escape from La Catedral in July 1992 marked the beginning of the end for Pablo Escobar. He was now a fugitive in his own city, his power and influence significantly diminished. The two-pronged attack against him intensified with relentless ferocity. On one side was the official state force, the search block, or Bloque de Búsqueda. This was a special, multi-thousand-strong police unit created with the sole purpose of capturing or killing him. It was led by the determined Colonel Hugo Martinez, a man whose integrity and resolve made him immune to Escobar's bribes and threats. The search block was now better equipped, better trained, and more focused than ever before. Crucially, they received direct, on-the-ground assistance from the United States. The CIA and the Pentagon provided vital intelligence, surveillance technology, and communication intercept capabilities. A small team of Delta Force operatives was embedded with the search block, advising on tactical operations and manhunt strategies. This American involvement provided a technological edge that Escobar could not easily counter. On the other side was the unofficial but equally brutal vigilante group known as Los Pepes. The name stood for People Persecuted by Pablo Escobar. This group was a coalition of his enemies, including the rival Cali Cartel, former associates he had betrayed, and paramilitary death squads. Los Pepes, funded by the Cali Cartel, waged a ruthless shadow war. They systematically dismantled Escobar's empire by targeting its human infrastructure. They hunted down and assassinated his lawyers, accountants, and financial managers. They bombed his family's homes, his offices, and his numerous properties. Their goal was to destroy Escobar's support network, drain his resources, and isolate him completely. This twin pressure squeezed Escobar from all sides. His world shrunk to a few neighborhoods in Medellin, primarily the upscale area of Los Olivos. He was constantly on the move, hopping between safe houses, never staying in one place for more than a few days. He relied on a small, dwindling circle of trusted bodyguards and a network of lookouts. Communication became his greatest vulnerability. His beloved telephone, once the tool of his empire, was now a deadly liability. The search block, with American technology, had become expert at tracking his radio and phone signals. Every call he made to his family was a risk that could lead the hunters to his door. During this period, his primary concern was the safety of his wife and 2 children. Fearing for their lives from Los Pepes, he arranged for them to flee to Germany and later to the United States. Their departure left him completely alone, a solitary figure hiding in a city he once ruled. The pressure began to warp his mind. He became increasingly paranoid, suspecting betrayal at every turn. His violent temper, always close to the surface, now erupted with terrifying frequency. He ordered the deaths of anyone he remotely suspected of disloyalty, further eroding the trust within his own organization. The manhunt reached its climax in late 1993. The search block had been meticulously mapping his communication patterns. They identified a key phone number used by Escobar to contact his family. Through relentless surveillance and intelligence gathering, they narrowed his location down to a specific set of buildings in the Los Olivos neighborhood. On December 2, 1993, the pieces finally fell into place. A combination of radio triangulation and human intelligence pinpointed him to a specific safe house. The search block moved in quickly, surrounding the modest 3-story house at Calle 79 Bay, number 45D94. Inside were Escobar, his bodyguard, and his son. When they realized they were surrounded, Escobar and his bodyguard attempted to flee across the rooftop. The rooftop escape was a tactic he had used successfully before. But this time, there was no escape. A fierce gunfight erupted between the fleeing men and the police officers on adjacent rooftops. In the ensuing exchange of gunfire, Pablo Escobar was shot. The official account states that the fatal bullets were fired by Colombian National Police. The shooting ended the life of the 44-year-old kingpin. The scene that followed was one of macabre celebration. Police officers posed for photographs with the corpse, a stark image that was broadcast around the world. In the neighborhoods of Medellin, the reaction was mixed. Among the wealthy and the middle class, there was relief and celebration. But in the poor barrios he had patronized, many mourned the death of their Robin Hood. The death of Pablo Escobar brought an immediate end to the Medellín Cartel's dominance. It did not, however, end the drug trade or the violence in Colombia. The rival Cali cartel simply stepped in to fill the power vacuum, and new criminal structures would later emerge. The hunt was over. But the legacy of Pablo Escobar was just beginning to shake.
Part 6, The Aftermath, Legacy and Lasting Impact. The death of Pablo Escobar on a Medellin rooftop in December 1993 did not mark the end of the story. It merely closed one violent chapter while opening several others. The immediate aftermath of his death was a mixture of relief, celebration, and uncertainty. For the Colombian government and its international allies, it was a monumental victory. The man who had held a nation hostage for nearly a decade was gone. President Cesar Gaviria declared that Colombia had reclaimed its sovereignty. The streets of major cities saw public celebrations, particularly among the middle and upper classes. For the United States government, it was the conclusion of one of the most intensive manhunts in history. American agents and advisors who had worked with the search block returned home, their mission accomplished. The DEA and other agencies shifted their focus to the next major threat, the Cali cartel. However, the situation was far more complex than a simple victory. In the poor neighborhoods of Medellin, particularly in the slums Escobar had funded, there was genuine mourning. Many residents had lost their primary benefactor. The soccer fields, housing projects, and community centers he built stood as physical reminders of his complex legacy.
To them, he was not just a criminal. He was Pablo, the man who had put food on their tables. His funeral drew massive crowds, a testament to this complicated public perception. The media spectacle surrounding his death continued for weeks. Newspapers and television stations around the world dissected every detail of the final shootout. The iconic photographs of his body on the rooftop became symbols of the fall of a king. But beneath the surface, the structural problems that allowed his rise remained largely unaddressed. The most immediate consequence was a shift in the criminal landscape. With the Medellín Cartel decapitated, the Cali Cartel quickly moved to fill the power vacuum. For a brief period, the Cali Cartel became the dominant force in the global cocaine trade. They operated with a different philosophy, preferring bribery and business over Escobar's public terrorism. However, their dominance was also short-lived, as law enforcement pressure soon targeted them as well. The end of the Medellín Cartel also led to the fragmentation of the drug trade. Instead of one powerful cartel, numerous smaller, more decentralized criminal bands emerged. These groups, known as cartelitos, were often more violent and harder to track. They diversified into new criminal activities, including extortion, kidnapping, and illegal mining. The violence did not end with Escobar. It evolved. Another significant impact was on Colombian politics and society. The campaign of terror waged by Escobar had a profound psychological effect on the nation. Journalists, judges, and politicians had been murdered for doing their jobs. The line between the state and the criminal underworld had been permanently blurred. The institutional corruption that Escobar exploited took years to even begin to address. The country's international reputation was severely damaged. For years, Colombia was synonymous with drugs and violence in the global imagination. Tourism plummeted, and foreign investment became more difficult to secure. It would take a generation for the country to begin rebranding itself. On a personal level, the fate of Escobar's family became a subject of ongoing public fascination. His wife and 2 children moved to Argentina under new identities. They have since granted interviews and written books attempting to control their own narrative. His son, Juan Pablo, now known as Sebastián Marroquín, has publicly apologized for his father's crimes. He has spoken out against the drug trade and sought reconciliation with his father's victims. The story of Pablo Escobar has also become a global industry. Numerous books, documentaries, and television series have been produced. The most famous is the Netflix series Narcos, which introduced his story to a new generation. This has created a strange form of dark tourism in Medellin. Tourists now visit his grave, the rooftop where he died, and the ruins of his mansion, Hacienda Nápoles. This commercialization has been controversial, with many arguing it glorifies a mass murderer. The legacy of Pablo Escobar is therefore a double-edged sword. He's remembered as a ruthless criminal who caused incalculable suffering. Yet he's also remembered as a symbol of the extreme inequality and social injustice that can create such figures. His life serves as a permanent cautionary tale about the corrupting nature of absolute power and wealth. It also serves as a lesson in the limitations of a purely militarized approach to the drug problem. The war on drugs, fueled in part by the threat he represented, has continued for decades with mixed results. The demand for narcotics in consuming countries remains high, ensuring a steady supply of new players to replace the old ones. The story of Pablo Escobar is not just the story of one man. It's the story of a global phenomenon with deep economic and social roots. His rise and fall exposed the interconnectedness of crime, politics, and economics in the modern world. It's a story that continues to resonate because the issues it raised are still unresolved.
Part 7. The Global Cocaine Trade, Escobar's International Network. Pablo Escobar's empire was not confined to the mountains of Colombia. His reach extended across continents, creating a sophisticated global network that moved drugs and money with stunning efficiency. Understanding this network is crucial to understanding the true scale of his operation. The journey of a kilogram of cocaine began in the remote jungles of Peru and Bolivia. Farmers harvested coca leaves, the raw material for cocaine. These leaves were processed into a crude paste in hidden jungle laboratories. The paste was then smuggled across borders into Colombia. In Colombia, the Medellín Cartel operated sophisticated refining laboratories. These labs were often hidden on large rural estates or in dense jungle areas. Here, the coca paste was transformed into pure, high-quality cocaine hydrochloride. The finished product was then packaged for its long journey north. Transportation was the cartel's greatest logistical challenge and most brilliant innovation. The primary route was through the Caribbean, a vast area difficult to patrol. The cartel used every conceivable method to move their product. They employed a fleet of small, fast airplanes that could land on makeshift jungle runways. They used fishing boats and go-fast boats that could outrun Coast Guard vessels. They even used commercial shipping containers, hiding drugs among legitimate cargo. A key innovation was the use of Norman's Cay in the Bahamas. This island, controlled by cartel member Carlos Lader, served as a perfect transshipment point. Planes from Colombia would land there, refuel, and transfer their cargo to smaller planes bound for Florida. This created a reliable aerial ridge that operated for years. The United States was the primary market, but the cartel's distribution network was vast. Major distribution cells were established in Miami, New York, and Los Angeles. These cells were often run by Colombian nationals who reported directly to Medellin. They distributed the cocaine to street-level dealers across the country. The profits were astronomical and created a massive money laundering challenge. The cartel developed sophisticated methods to repatriate their income. They used the black market peso exchange, a complex system that allowed them to convert dollars to pesos. They invested in legitimate businesses in Colombia and abroad. They purchased real estate, cattle ranches, and other assets that could hold value. The scale of their operation required international banking connections. They worked with banks in Panama, the Cayman Islands, and Switzerland to hide their wealth. They worked with corrupt financial advisors who helped them move money across borders. At its peak, the Medellín Cartel was earning an estimated $20 to $30 billion annually. This wealth gave Escobar unprecedented power to corrupt institutions. He bribed politicians, police officers, and judges throughout Latin America. His network of corruption extended to the highest levels of government. The global nature of the operation made law enforcement efforts extremely difficult. Different countries had different laws and levels of cooperation. Jurisdictional disputes often hampered investigations. The cartel exploited these gaps in international law enforcement. The impact of this network was felt around the world. Cocaine addiction rates soared in consuming countries. The flood of cheap, high-quality cocaine devastated communities. Drug-related violence became a problem in cities far from Colombia. The economic impact was equally significant. The massive flow of drug money distorted local economies in Colombia. It created inflation in some sectors while undermining legitimate businesses. The environmental damage from coca cultivation and processing was extensive. Jungles were cleared for coca farms, and chemicals from processing polluted rivers. The Medellín Cartel's global network represented a new kind of criminal organization. It was decentralized, adaptable, and technologically sophisticated. It operated like a multinational corporation, with Escobar as its CEO. This model would be copied by criminal organizations around the world. The fall of Escobar did not mean the end of this global network. The infrastructure and routes he established remained in place. New organizations simply took over the existing systems. The demand for cocaine continued, ensuring there would always be suppliers. Today, the global cocaine trade continues to evolve. New routes through West Africa have emerged. Criminal organizations have become more sophisticated in their methods. The basic template created by Escobar remains relevant decades later. His international network demonstrated the limitations of national law enforcement. It showed that criminal organizations could operate globally while nations struggled to coordinate their responses. This lesson would shape international drug policy for generations. The story of Pablo Escobar's global network is ultimately a story about globalization itself. It shows how borders become meaningless in the face of determined criminal enterprise. It demonstrates the dark side of global interconnectedness, and it serves as a warning about the challenges of regulating international commerce in an increasingly connected world.
Part 8. The Human Toll. Victims of the Escobar Era. The story of Pablo Escobar is often told through the lens of his wealth and power. But the true cost of his reign can only be measured in human lives. The victims of his violence number in the thousands, each with their own story. The most visible victims were those in positions of authority who stood against him. Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonilla was the first high-profile assassination. His murder in 1984 sent shockwaves through Colombian society. It demonstrated that no one was safe from Escobar's reach. Journalist Guillermo Cano was another prominent victim. His newspaper, El Espectador, had dared to investigate Escobar's empire. His assassination sent a chilling message to the press corps. Many journalists began self-censoring out of fear for their lives. The judicial system was particularly targeted. Dozens of judges and prosecutors were murdered. The most infamous attack was on the Palace of Justice in 1985. The M19 guerrilla group, allegedly paid by Escobar, stormed the building. The ensuing siege left more than 100 people dead, including 11 Supreme Court justices. The attack was aimed at destroying extradition documents. It showed Escobar's willingness to attack the very heart of the state. But these high-profile victims were only the tip of the iceberg. The majority of victims were ordinary Colombians caught in the crossfire. Police officers were systematically targeted throughout the country. Hundreds were killed in bombings, shootings, and ambushes. Their families were left to mourn without the protection their loved ones had died defending. Rival drug traffickers and their associates were executed without trial. The body count from cartel wars reached into the thousands. Many victims were simply dumped in rivers or left on roadsides as warnings. The violence became so routine that it barely made the news. Civilians were often collateral damage in Escobar's war. The Avianca Flight 203 bombing in 1989 killed all 107 people on board. The target was a presidential candidate, but the victims included tourists and business people. The bombing of the DAS security building in Bogotá killed 63 people and injured hundreds. The streets of Medellin became killing fields during the height of the violence. Children going to school, people shopping in markets, all were potential victims. The psychological impact on a generation of Colombians was profound. People learned to avoid public gatherings and to be constantly vigilant. Many developed what became known as Colombian necktie, constantly looking over their shoulder. Beyond the direct violence, there were other victims. The poor who accepted Escobar's charity paid a different price. They became dependent on his patronage, trapped in his web of influence. When his empire fell, many lost their only source of support.
The farmers who grew coca were victims of an economic system they couldn't control. They faced pressure from both the cartels and the government. Their crops were sprayed with herbicides, destroying their livelihoods. Many were forced to become refugees in their own country. The environmental damage affected entire communities. Chemicals from cocaine processing poisoned water supplies. Deforestation for coca fields destroyed ecosystems that communities depended on. The social fabric of many communities was torn apart. Neighbors became suspicious of each other, never knowing who might be an informant. The culture of plata or plomo corrupted relationships at every level. Many young people saw drug trafficking as their only opportunity for advancement. The impact extended beyond Colombia's borders. In the United States, the crack cocaine epidemic devastated inner cities. Addiction rates soared, destroying families and communities. The violence of the drug trade was exported to American streets. The war on drugs, escalated in response to Escobar, created its own victims. Mass incarceration disproportionately affected minority communities. The human rights abuses in the name of drug enforcement created new cycles of violence. The victims of Pablo Escobar's era are too numerous to count. Their stories are often lost in the sensational narrative of the drug lord's life. But each victim represents a human life cut short or forever altered. Their families continue to live with the consequences decades later. Some have found the courage to speak out. The son of a murdered politician, the widow of a killed police officer, the child who lost parents in a bombing. Their voices provide the necessary counterpoint to the mythologizing of Escobar. They remind us that behind the statistics are real human beings. The true legacy of Pablo Escobar is not his wealth or his power. It is the trauma he inflicted on an entire nation. It is the generations of Colombians who grew up knowing only violence and fear. It is the institutional damage that would take decades to repair. Remembering the victims is not just about honoring the dead. It is about understanding the full cost of the drug trade. It is about recognizing that the pursuit of wealth and power at any cost has real consequences. And it is about ensuring that such a period of violence never happens again. The story of Pablo Escobar cannot be told without acknowledging the thousands of lives he destroyed. Their memory serves as the most powerful indictment of his crimes.
Part 9. The Psychology of Power. Understanding Escobar's Mind. Pablo Escobar remains one of the most complex psychological studies in criminal history. His mind was a labyrinth of contradictions that fueled his rise and eventual downfall. To understand his actions, we must explore the psychological forces that drove him. At his core, Escobar suffered from what psychologists might call narcissistic personality disorder. He possessed an inflated sense of self-importance and an insatiable need for admiration. His famous quote, "There can only be one king," reveals this profound narcissism. He genuinely believed he was destined for greatness beyond ordinary human constraints. His early life provides clues to this psychological development. Growing up in modest circumstances, he developed deep feelings of inferiority. His criminal beginnings, stealing tombstones, selling fake diplomas, show his disregard for social norms. These early behaviors suggest a pattern of antisocial tendencies from youth. The immense power he gained seemed to amplify these personality traits. As his wealth grew, so did his grandiosity and sense of entitlement. He began seeing himself as above the law, beyond conventional morality. This manifested in increasingly reckless and violent behavior. His relationship with violence was particularly telling.
He could order massacres without apparent remorse, yet he was known to cry during sentimental movies and doted on his children. This dichotomy between extreme violence and familial tenderness baffled observers. Psychologists might describe this as compartmentalization, the ability to separate different aspects of his life. He could be a loving father while simultaneously ordering the deaths of other fathers. This psychological splitting allowed him to maintain his self-image as a good man. His political ambitions reveal another layer of his psychology. He genuinely seemed to believe he could become president of Colombia. This wasn't just ambition, it was a delusion of grandeur supported by his wealth. When this dream was thwarted, his response was characteristically narcissistic. Rather than accepting defeat, he declared war on the entire Colombian establishment. The rejection triggered what psychologists call narcissistic rage. His response was disproportionate and destructive, exactly what we see in narcissistic injury. The bombings, assassinations, and terror were his way of punishing those who rejected him. His fear of extradition provides another psychological insight. The thought of being tried in a foreign court was unbearable to his narcissistic psyche. He needed to control his narrative and his fate completely. Being paraded before American courts would have been the ultimate humiliation. His behavior in La Catedral demonstrates his need for control. Even in prison, he had to be the one in charge, the king of his domain. The murders he committed there showed he couldn't tolerate even perceived slights. His paranoia grew as his power waned. He began seeing enemies everywhere, trusting almost no one. This paranoia was both a cause and effect of his isolation. As his world shrank, his mental state deteriorated further. His final months show a man trapped by his own psychology. The same traits that built his empire now prevented any escape or negotiation. His narcissism made surrender impossible, his paranoia made trust unthinkable. From a psychological perspective, his path was almost predetermined. Certain personality traits, when combined with unlimited power, create a dangerous formula. The absence of checks and balances allowed his worst qualities to flourish. His story serves as a case study in the psychology of absolute power. Modern psychological analysis suggests several key factors in his development. The cultural context of machismo in Colombian society likely played a role. The extreme income inequality provided fertile ground for his particular brand of populism. His intelligence and charisma allowed him to manipulate others effectively. But perhaps most importantly, he lacked what psychologists call theory of mind. He seemed unable to truly understand others' perspectives or suffering. People were either tools to be used or obstacles to be removed. This profound empathy deficit enabled his worst atrocities. Yet he understood human nature well enough to manipulate masses. His philanthropy wasn't just charity, it was psychological manipulation. He knew that providing for basic needs would create loyalty and protection. This understanding of crowd psychology shows his strategic intelligence. His legacy in popular culture reveals another psychological truth. The ongoing fascination with his story taps into deep human curiosities. We're drawn to figures who break all rules, who achieve the impossible. This fascination, while understandable, can dangerously romanticize pathology. From a clinical perspective, Escobar represents a perfect storm of personality disorders. Narcissistic, antisocial, and paranoid features all combined. When such pathology meets opportunity, the results are often catastrophic. His life offers sobering lessons about power and personality. It shows how unchecked ambition can destroy not just individuals, but entire societies. It demonstrates the importance of psychological screening for positions of power. And it reminds us that charisma and intelligence without ethics are dangerously destructive weapons. Understanding Escobar's psychology doesn't excuse his actions, but it helps explain how such destruction becomes possible. It shows how personality pathology can scale with power and resources, and it provides warning signs for identifying similar patterns in others. The psychological portrait of Pablo Escobar serves as a cautionary tale. It shows what happens when certain personality traits meet unlimited opportunity. It demonstrates the importance of psychological health in leadership. And it reminds us that the most dangerous weapons aren't always physical. Sometimes they're psychological.
Part 10. The Modern Legacy. Escobar's lasting impact on Colombia. The physical presence of Pablo Escobar may have ended in 1993, but his shadow continues to stretch across modern Colombia. The nation has undergone a remarkable transformation, yet the scars of the Escobar era remain deeply embedded in its social and political fabric. Understanding this lasting impact is crucial to comprehending contemporary Colombia. One of the most visible legacies is the phenomenon of narco-tourism in Medellin. The city that was once the epicenter of violence has reinvented itself as a tourist destination. However, a dark sub-industry has emerged, offering tours of Escobar's former haunts. Visitors can see the Monaco building, site of a car bombing, or the rooftop where he was killed. This commercialization of tragedy remains deeply controversial. Many citizens feel it glorifies a dark chapter and disrespects the victims. Yet it persists, driven by global fascination and the economic benefits of tourism. The physical landscape of Medellin still bears traces of his influence. The impoverished neighborhoods he once patronized have undergone changes. Some community projects he funded still stand, creating complex local memories. Older residents sometimes speak of him with a mix of condemnation and nostalgia. For them, he represents a time when their needs were noticed, however cynically. This complicated public memory continues to influence local politics and social dynamics. On a national level, the institutional damage took decades to repair. The justice system had to be completely rebuilt after years of intimidation and corruption. New anti-corruption measures and witness protection programs were implemented. The police force underwent extensive reform and professionalization. International cooperation became a cornerstone of Colombian security policy. The war on drugs, while ongoing, adopted more sophisticated approaches. Crop substitution programs attempted to offer farmers alternatives to coca. Social programs aimed at preventing youth from entering criminal organizations. Yet the fundamental economic drivers of the drug trade remain largely unchanged. The demand for cocaine in Europe and North America continues to fuel production. New criminal organizations have emerged to replace the old cartels. Groups like the Clan del Golfo and dissident FARC factions now control trafficking routes. They operate with less flamboyance but equal brutality. The violence has become more decentralized but no less deadly. Rural areas continue to suffer from conflicts over drug production territories. The environmental damage from coca cultivation persists. Deforestation and chemical pollution continue to affect vulnerable ecosystems. The social impact on a generation cannot be overstated. Many Colombians who lived through the Escobar era suffer from collective trauma. The constant fear and violence left psychological scars that are still healing. Families who lost loved ones continue seeking justice and closure. The political landscape was permanently altered by the narco violence. Security became the paramount issue in Colombian politics for a generation. This led to the rise of hardline politicians and controversial security policies. The debate over how to balance security and human rights continues today. The extradition policy that Escobar feared so much has become standard practice. Hundreds of drug traffickers have been sent to face justice in the United States. This has become a key tool in dismantling criminal organizations. Yet it remains controversial, with some arguing it undermines Colombian sovereignty. Economically, the narco wealth created distortions that are still being untangled. Properties acquired with drug money have been subject to lengthy legal battles. The process of asset forfeiture and returning wealth to the state has been complex. Money laundering techniques have become more sophisticated, making enforcement harder. The cultural impact is perhaps the most surprising legacy. Escobar has become a global brand, featured in countless films and television shows. This has created a strange disconnect between his international image and local reality. In Colombia, this media representation is often viewed with ambivalence. Many feel it trivializes their national trauma. Yet it has also sparked important conversations about memory and history. The educational system has had to confront how to teach this difficult period. Textbooks now include sections on the drug wars and their impact. Museums and memorials attempt to document the era with sensitivity to victims. The goal is to ensure future generations understand what happened and why. The process of transitional justice continues. Truth commissions have documented thousands of cases of violence and human rights abuses. Families continue to search for missing loved ones. The process of reconciliation is ongoing and often painful. Internationally, the Escobar case study continues to influence drug policy. His rise and fall are cited in debates about prohibition versus legalization. The limitations of purely military solutions to drug trafficking have become apparent. The need for comprehensive approaches addressing both supply and demand is widely recognized. Modern Colombia stands as a testament to resilience. The country has made remarkable progress in reducing violence and strengthening institutions. Cities like Medellin have become models of urban innovation and social transformation. Yet the work of rebuilding continues. The legacy of Pablo Escobar serves as a permanent reminder. It shows how criminal wealth can corrupt societies. It demonstrates the devastating human cost of the drug trade, and it stands as a warning about what happens when violence becomes a business model. Most importantly, it shows that recovery is possible, though never easy. The story of modern Colombia is not just about overcoming its past. It is about building a future where such figures can never rise again. This may be the most important legacy of all, the determination to learn from history.
Part 11. The Family Aftermath. Life in the Shadow of a Legend. The story of Pablo Escobar does not end with his death on a Medellin rooftop. His family, his wife, Maria Victoria Henao, son Juan Pablo, and daughter Manuela were left to navigate a world forever changed by his actions. Their journey from unimaginable wealth to exile and anonymity is a dramatic chapter in itself. In the immediate aftermath of Escobar's death, his family became targets. Los Pepes and other enemies saw them as extensions of the cartel leader. Threats against their lives were constant and credible. They entered a desperate period of hiding within Colombia. Maria Victoria, then just 26 years old, had to protect her two young children. They moved between safe houses, never staying in one place for more than a few days. The children couldn't attend school or play outside. Their once lavish life had become a nightmare of fear and isolation. After months in hiding, they managed to flee Colombia. Their first destination was Mozambique, where they sought asylum. However, international pressure forced them to keep moving. They eventually settled in Buenos Aires, Argentina, under new identities. Juan Pablo became Sebastián Marroquín. Manuela became Juana Manuela Marroquín. Maria Victoria became María Isabel Santos Caballero. The transition to normal life was incredibly difficult. They had gone from extreme wealth to modest means almost overnight. More challenging was the psychological adjustment. Sebastián struggled with his identity and the legacy of his father. He knew his father as a loving parent who played with him and read him stories. The world knew his father as a mass murderer and drug lord. Reconciling these two images became his life's work. The family lived in constant fear of being discovered. They avoided other Colombian immigrants and kept to themselves. Simple activities like going to the supermarket were fraught with anxiety. They knew that if their true identities were revealed, their lives would be in danger. Financial survival became a daily challenge. Most of the Escobar fortune had been seized or stolen. What remained was inaccessible due to legal restrictions. Maria Victoria had to find ways to support her family without drawing attention. She started small businesses and invested carefully. The children attended local schools and tried to blend in. Manuela, being younger, adapted more easily to her new life. Sebastián found the adjustment much more difficult. He felt the weight of his father's legacy constantly. In his late teens, he began a journey of reconciliation. He started by researching his father's crimes objectively. He read court documents and testimonies from victims. He sought to understand the full scope of the damage his father had caused. This process was painful but necessary for his own healing. In 2009, he took a courageous step forward. He reached out to the sons of two of his father's most prominent victims. He contacted Rodrigo Lara, son of the assassinated justice minister. He also connected with Juan Carlos Gaviria, brother of the former president. These meetings were emotional and transformative. The sons of victims and the son of their killer found common ground. They discovered they were all victims of the same tragedy. This began a process of reconciliation that continues to this day. Sebastián has since become a public figure in his own right. He studied architecture and has written books about his experiences. He gives lectures about the dangers of drug trafficking. He has become an advocate for peace and reconciliation. His message is consistent: we must break the cycle of violence. He takes responsibility for his father's legacy while carving his own path. He has publicly apologized to his father's victims. He works to ensure his father's story is remembered accurately. Maria Victoria has maintained a lower profile. She has focused on raising her daughter and maintaining their privacy. She has never publicly discussed her life with Pablo in detail. Her silence speaks volumes about the pain of those years. Manuela has largely stayed out of the public eye. She has built a life separate from her father's legacy. She represents the possibility of moving forward. The family story raises important questions about guilt and responsibility. To what extent should family members be held accountable? How does one live with such a complicated inheritance? Their journey offers no easy answers, only hard-won wisdom. They have paid a price for Pablo Escobar's crimes that continues to this day. Yet they have also shown that redemption is possible, that we are not doomed to repeat our family's mistakes, that even the darkest legacies can be transformed into lessons for future generations. The story of the Escobar family continues to evolve. It serves as a powerful reminder that violence creates ripples that touch generations. It shows that the human capacity for healing is remarkable, and it demonstrates that while we cannot choose our inheritance, we can choose what we do with it.
Part 12. The International Response: Global War on Drugs. The rise of Pablo Escobar coincided with a pivotal moment in international drug policy. His unprecedented criminal empire forced nations worldwide to confront the limitations of their anti-narcotic strategies. The global response to the Medellín Cartel would shape drug enforcement for decades to come. The United States led the international charge against Escobar. The Reagan administration had declared drugs a national security threat. The Medellín Cartel became the primary target of this new war. American agencies deployed multiple strategies simultaneously. The Drug Administration Agency established a major presence in Colombia. DEA agents worked directly with Colombian police units. They provided intelligence, training, and operational support. The Central Intelligence Agency focused on gathering strategic intelligence. They monitored cartel communications and financial networks. They tracked international shipping routes and money laundering operations. The Pentagon provided military assistance and equipment. Black Hawk helicopters and surveillance aircraft were sent to Colombia. American military advisors trained Colombian counter-narcotics units. This multi-agency approach represented a new model of international cooperation. Other nations found themselves drawn into the conflict. Mexico became a key transit country as Caribbean routes were secured. European nations faced growing cocaine shipments through their ports. The Bahamas and other Caribbean nations struggled with cartel infiltration. The financial system became a major battlefield. Banks in Panama and the Cayman Islands faced pressure to tighten regulations. The United States pushed for stronger international anti-money laundering laws. Financial intelligence units began sharing information across borders. The United Nations became involved in coordinating global response. The 1988 UN Convention Against Illicit Traffic in Narcotic Drugs set new standards. It required member states to criminalize money laundering. It established frameworks for extradition and mutual legal assistance. This international legal framework was crucial for fighting transnational crime. The European response evolved more slowly than the American approach. European nations initially focused on demand reduction and harm minimization. The scale of Escobar's operation forced a reassessment of this strategy. Interpol coordination improved significantly during this period. The international manhunt for Escobar involved police forces across continents. Extradition became the most controversial tool in the arsenal. The United States viewed it as essential for breaking cartel leadership. Colombian courts initially resisted, citing constitutional protections. Escobar's violent campaign against extradition showed how much he feared it. The policy created deep political divisions within Colombia. Many saw it as an infringement on national sovereignty. Others believed it was necessary for confronting powerful criminal organizations. The debate continues to this day in extradition cases worldwide. The military dimension of the drug war expanded dramatically. What began as a law enforcement issue became a counterinsurgency campaign. The lines between drug trafficking and political violence blurred. This created complex legal and ethical questions about military involvement. The human rights impact of these policies became increasingly concerning. Civilian casualties occurred during counter-narcotics operations. Paramilitary groups exploited the conflict for their own purposes. The focus on military solutions sometimes overshadowed social approaches. The economic costs of the drug war mounted steadily. The United States spent billions on international drug enforcement. Colombia's economy suffered from the violence and instability. Other nations faced similar burdens as the trade shifted to new routes. The environmental impact of eradication efforts drew criticism. Aerial spraying of coca fields affected legal crops and water sources. Deforestation continued as growers moved to more remote areas. The ecological damage had long-term consequences for the region. The international media played a crucial role in shaping public perception. Images of violence in Colombia raised global awareness. Investigative journalism exposed corruption and human rights abuses. The coverage influenced political decisions in capitals worldwide. Academic institutions began studying the phenomenon systematically. Researchers analyzed the economic drivers of the drug trade. They examined the social conditions that allowed cartels to flourish. Their work provided valuable insights for policymakers. Non-governmental organizations documented the human cost of the conflict. Human rights groups reported on abuses by all sides. Development agencies worked on alternative livelihood programs. Their perspectives added depth to the understanding of the conflict. The international response evolved as the nature of the threat changed. When the Cali cartel replaced Medellin, strategies had to adapt. The focus shifted to financial investigations and intelligence gathering. The lessons learned from fighting Escobar informed new approaches. Today, the international drug control regime reflects this history. The tensions between different approaches remain unresolved. The balance between enforcement and public health continues to be debated. The legacy of the global response to Escobar endures in current policies. The story shows both the possibilities and limitations of international cooperation. It demonstrates how criminal organizations can exploit gaps in jurisdiction. It reveals the challenges of coordinating multiple national interests, and it highlights the difficulty of finding solutions that address both supply and demand. The war on drugs launched in response to Escobar continues in new forms. The tactics have become more sophisticated. The understanding of the problem has deepened, but the fundamental challenges remain.
Part 13. The Media War, Controlling the Narrative. Pablo Escobar understood the power of public perception long before it became standard practice for criminals. His relationship with the media was complex, strategic, and ultimately crucial to his rise and fall. He waged a media war on multiple fronts, using both carrot and stick with devastating effectiveness. From his early days, Escobar cultivated his public image carefully. He presented himself as a man of the people, a successful entrepreneur who hadn't forgotten his roots. His philanthropy was not just charity, it was public relations. Every soccer field he built, every house he gave away, was a media opportunity. Local newspapers in Medellin often carried stories about his generosity. These stories were sometimes placed through direct payments to journalists. Other times, they resulted from genuine gratitude in impoverished communities. The narrative of Robin Hood was carefully constructed and meticulously maintained. As his power grew, so did his media strategy. He began cultivating relationships with national media figures. Some journalists accepted his money and wrote favorable stories. Others were threatened into compliance or silence. The choice was simple: plata o plomo, silver or lead. This approach created a climate of fear and self-censorship in Colombian media. The bombing of El Espectador newspaper in 1986 was a turning point. The attack followed the paper's relentless investigation into his empire. It demonstrated that even major media outlets weren't safe from his wrath. The message was clear: cross us, and we will destroy you. Yet Escobar also understood the value of positive coverage. He granted interviews to selected journalists, presenting his side of the story. He positioned himself as a patriot, fighting against American imperialism. He claimed the drug problem was America's responsibility, not Colombia's. This narrative resonated with certain segments of Colombian society. The international media became another battlefield. Foreign correspondents in Colombia faced difficult choices. Some were seduced by access to the mysterious drug lord. Others risked their lives to report the truth. The international coverage often focused on the sensational aspects, the luxury, the violence, the bizarre details of his life. This coverage sometimes obscured the human cost of his actions. It contributed to the myth-making that continues to this day.
Escobar's own media production was sophisticated for its time. He funded sympathetic publications that presented his worldview. He produced videos explaining his political positions. He even established his own radio station at one point. This media empire allowed him to speak directly to his supporters. The psychological impact on journalists was profound. Many lived with armed guards and death threats. Some left the profession entirely. Others left Colombia, becoming exiles because of their work. The murder of Guillermo Cano had a chilling effect that lasted for years. Yet some journalists continued their work despite the risks. Their courage ensured that the truth eventually emerged. Their reporting provided crucial evidence for investigators. Their stories gave voice to the victims. The media war reached its peak during Escobar's parliamentary campaign. He used his wealth to fund an extensive publicity campaign. Posters, radio ads, and public appearances presented him as a reformer. For a brief moment, he almost succeeded in rebranding himself. When his criminal past was exposed, the media turned against him. The same outlets that had once accepted his money now investigated him. The fall from media darling to public enemy was swift and brutal. This rejection fueled his rage and his subsequent war against the establishment. In his final years, Escobar's media strategy became more desperate. He granted interviews from hiding, trying to control his narrative. He released communiques explaining his actions. He positioned himself as a victim of state persecution. These efforts became increasingly unconvincing as the body count rose. After his death, the media narrative shifted again. The sensational aspects of his life dominated coverage. The complexity of the story was often reduced to simple tropes. The victims were sometimes forgotten in the fascination with the perpetrator. The ongoing media fascination with Escobar reveals deeper truths. It shows how crime and power continue to captivate audiences. It demonstrates the tension between factual reporting and sensationalism. It highlights the ethical challenges of covering criminal figures. Today, the media landscape has changed dramatically. Social media has democratized information, but also complicated the narrative. New platforms have emerged for telling these stories. The ethical questions remain as relevant as ever. The story of Escobar's media war offers important lessons. It shows how powerful figures can manipulate public opinion. It demonstrates the importance of independent journalism. It reveals the vital role media plays in holding power accountable. Most importantly, it reminds us that the stories we tell about crime matter. They shape public understanding and policy responses. They influence how history remembers these events. They determine whether victims are honored or forgotten. The media war between Escobar and Colombian society was ultimately won by truth, but the victory came at a terrible cost, and the lessons learned continue to resonate in media rooms around the world. Part 14. The Financial Empire. Following the Money. Pablo Escobar's most enduring legacy might be his revolutionary approach to criminal finance. He didn't just build a drug empire, he built a financial system that challenged international banking. Understanding how he managed his wealth reveals much about modern money laundering. At its peak, the Medellín Cartel was earning an estimated $420 million per week. This created an immediate problem: what to do with all that cash? Physical storage became a major issue early on. Escobar purchased warehouses specifically for storing currency. He famously complained about rats eating through his cash reserves. He estimated losing 10% of his annual income to vermin and moisture damage. But storage was only the beginning of his financial challenges. The real problem was converting cash into usable wealth. This required sophisticated money laundering on an industrial scale.
The cartel developed multiple systems for cleaning their money. One method involved the black market peso exchange. This complex system worked through parallel banking networks. Cartel representatives would sell dollars to Colombian businessmen at favorable rates. These businessmen needed dollars for importing goods from other countries. The cartel got clean pesos while the businessmen got cheap dollars. Everyone won except the legal economy and tax authorities. Another method involved purchasing legitimate businesses. The cartel bought hundreds of companies across Latin America. They owned car dealerships, real estate agencies, and construction firms. These businesses provided perfect covers for injecting illegal money into the economy. The scale of their purchases was staggering. At one point, Escobar owned most of the apartments in a Medellin neighborhood. He purchased entire blocks of Miami real estate. His portfolio included ranches, hotels, and shopping centers. International banking systems were exploited systematically. Panamanian banks became favorite destinations for cartel money. The Cayman Islands and Switzerland also received significant deposits. Bank secrecy laws provided protection from investigators. When banks became too risky, the cartel turned to trade-based money laundering. They would over-invoice imports or under-invoice exports. The difference in value would be paid with drug money. This method was harder to detect than simple bank transfers. The cartel also invested heavily in the legal economy. They purchased shares in major Colombian companies. They funded agricultural projects and industrial developments. Some of these investments continue to yield returns today. Cash smuggling remained an essential part of the operation. Light aircraft would fly millions of dollars to offshore locations. Commercial flights had hidden compartments for currency. Even submarines were modified to transport cash. The amounts involved were difficult to comprehend. At one point, American authorities found $20 million in a single apartment. Another raid uncovered $50 million in a California storage unit. These were just operational funds, not the main reserves. Financial investigation became a key tool for law enforcement. The DEA established special financial investigation units. They tracked wire transfers and bank transactions. They followed the money trail to cartel leadership. This financial intelligence proved more valuable than drug seizures. It led to the discovery of hidden assets and secret accounts. It identified key players in the money laundering networks. It provided evidence for prosecutions and asset forfeiture. The cat-and-mouse game between cartel financiers and investigators never stopped. As authorities closed one loophole, the cartel found another. The innovation in money laundering methods was constant. Some techniques developed then are still used by criminal organizations today. The collapse of the Medellín Cartel created new financial challenges. Billions of dollars in assets were suddenly up for grabs. Some were seized by governments through asset forfeiture. Others were stolen by former associates or hidden in complex trusts. The process of recovering this wealth continues decades later. Colombian authorities still occasionally discover hidden Escobar assets. Properties surface under false ownership documents. Bank accounts are found in obscure jurisdictions. The legal battles over these assets can last for years. The financial legacy extends beyond physical assets. The money laundering methods pioneered by the cartel evolved. Modern criminal organizations use more sophisticated versions. Cryptocurrencies and digital payments present new challenges. The basic principles remain the same, however. Criminals still need to convert cash into clean money. They still need to hide the origins of their wealth. They still need to integrate illegal profits into the legal economy. The fight against money laundering has also evolved. International cooperation has improved significantly. Financial intelligence sharing is now routine. Anti-money laundering laws are stricter and better enforced. Yet the fundamental challenge remains. As long as there's demand for illegal goods, there will be criminal profits, and as long as there are criminal profits, there will be money laundering. The story of Escobar's financial empire serves as a permanent case study. It shows the importance of following the money. It demonstrates the need for international financial regulation, and it reminds us that crime is ultimately a business. The most successful criminals understand this better than anyone else. They know that moving money is more important than moving drugs. They know that financial infrastructure is crucial for long-term success. They know that wealth, properly hidden, can survive long after they're gone. Pablo Escobar may be dead, but the financial systems he helped pioneer live on. New generations of criminals have learned from his successes and failures. The methods have become more sophisticated. The amounts have grown larger, but the game remains essentially the same.
Part 15. Conclusion. The enduring lesson of Pablo Escobar. The story of Pablo Escobar represents one of the most dramatic chapters in modern criminal history. His life serves as a complex case study in power, corruption, and the limits of ambition. Decades after his death, the lessons from his rise and fall remain profoundly relevant. Escobar demonstrated how criminal entrepreneurship can challenge state authority. He built an organization that operated like a parallel government. It had its own economy, its own justice system, and its own foreign policy. This model has been studied by security experts and criminologists worldwide. The social conditions that enabled his rise deserve careful examination. Extreme inequality creates fertile ground for criminal populism. When legal opportunities are scarce, illegal ones become attractive. When institutions are weak, strong men can fill the power vacuum. The international dimensions of his operation revealed new vulnerabilities in the global system. Borders proved meaningless against determined criminal networks. Financial systems were easily exploited for money laundering. Legal jurisdictions became obstacles rather than protections. The human cost of his empire cannot be overstated. Tens of thousands lost their lives in the violence he unleashed. Families were destroyed, communities were traumatized, and a generation was scarred. The psychological impact on Colombian society continues to this day. The environmental damage from his operations persists. Deforestation from coca cultivation altered ecosystems. Chemical pollution from processing labs contaminated water sources. The ecological consequences will be felt for generations. The economic distortions caused by narco wealth created lasting problems. Legitimate businesses struggled to compete with criminal enterprises. Real estate markets were manipulated by drug money. The very concept of value became distorted by illicit wealth. The political consequences reshaped Colombian democracy. Institutions had to be rebuilt from the ground up. New security protocols were implemented at great cost. The relationship between citizens and state was permanently altered. The law enforcement response evolved significantly during this period. New tactics for combating organized crime were developed. International cooperation became essential rather than optional. The importance of financial investigation was firmly established. Yet many fundamental challenges remain unresolved. The demand for illegal drugs continues to fuel criminal markets. Economic inequality still drives recruitment into criminal organizations. Corruption remains a persistent problem in many societies.
The media's role in shaping this narrative deserves reflection. The fascination with Escobar sometimes overshadows his victims. The complexity of the story is often reduced to simple tropes. The ethical challenges of covering criminal figures persist. For current and future generations, Escobar's story offers crucial warnings. It shows the dangers of unchecked ambition. It demonstrates how wealth without ethics leads to destruction. It reveals how quickly power can corrupt absolutely. The ongoing process of reconciliation in Colombia provides hope. Victims' families continue their search for truth and justice. Former combatants work to rebuild their lives and communities. The nation demonstrates remarkable resilience in facing its past. The international community has learned from this experience. Drug policy has become more sophisticated and comprehensive. Security cooperation has improved across borders. Financial regulation has tightened significantly. Yet the work is far from complete. New criminal organizations have emerged to replace the old ones. New drugs have appeared on the market. New technologies have created new vulnerabilities. The story of Pablo Escobar ultimately teaches us about human nature. It shows our capacity for both great evil and great resilience. It demonstrates how environment and opportunity shape destiny. It reminds us that choices have consequences that ripple through generations. As we reflect on this history, we must ask difficult questions. How do we address the root causes of criminality? How do we balance security and human rights? How do we build societies where such figures cannot rise? There are no simple answers, but the questions must be asked. The legacy of Pablo Escobar serves as a permanent cautionary tale. It stands as a warning about the corrupting influence of absolute power. It reminds us of the importance of strong institutions, and it demonstrates the enduring value of justice and truth. Future generations will continue to study this period. They will analyze what went wrong and what went right. They will learn from the mistakes and the successes, and they will face their own versions of these challenges. The story ends, but the lessons continue. In remembering Pablo Escobar, we must remember all his aspects. The ambitious young man from Medellin, the ruthless drug lord who terrorized a nation, the loving father who played with his children, the philanthropist who built homes for the poor, the terrorist who martyred thousands. All these versions coexist in one complicated history. Understanding this complexity is the first step toward learning from it. The final lesson may be the simplest. Power without conscience ultimately destroys itself. Wealth without purpose becomes a prison. And violence, no matter how successful, always carries a cost that must eventually be paid.